Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming, guys. I appreciate you all, whether you're watching us on YouTube or on Rumble. Today, I'm joined by a special guest, Matthew Ho. He's a former Marine and State Department official. In 2009, he resigned in protest from his post in Afghanistan with the State Department over the U.S. escalation of the war, and he has been a senior fellow with the Center for International Policy since 2010. Matthew, thank you very much for being with me today on Syriana Analysis. It's a pleasure and also an honor to have you on my channel. I see that most of the commentators are saying nice words about you. One of the commentators says, Matt Ho is a very intelligent and kind person, full of compassion. Thank you for having him, and thank you for being here. And it's a great frame behind you, Julian Assange's frame.
Thank you. Thank you for all that, Kevork. Thank you for having me on. Thank you for those kind comments. And yeah, of course, with regards to Julian Assange, what we're seeing, irrespective of what's happening with the extradition trial, with the fact that he's been in custody, in detention, in prison for, in effect, 12 years now.
Yes.
5 years just recently in Belmarsh, but you see that irregardless of all that, you see the continuation of his persecution and prosecution through other means. So here in the United States, our Congress is getting set to vote on a bill that would ban TikTok, right? I mean, that yes. There's a direct line behind the persecution of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks that begins, say, in 2010, roughly, to yes. the idea that we have to ban TikTok because it's getting out too much information. People are learning too much. I mean, that's the essence of why Western governments are so hateful and so scared of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, is because they provide that transparency. They let people know what's going on. And we've had this great technology, what you and I are using right here, yes. Right. I mean, but our phones, everything else, yes. And so we shouldn't be surprised that the American Congress is trying to ban TikTok. There's other reasons for it, of course, but one of the prime reasons is that they can't control the information, and that scares them to death. That scares the empire to death.
One of the points that you raised is very interesting, that the government's persecution is increasing because of the technology that we have in our hands. But what's also increasing? The resistance of the people is also increasing. And whatever they do, we will always find a different path and a different way to first build bridges between the people. The reason why I created this YouTube channel in 2017, I said, I want to speak to the American people. Like, what's happening in Syria is very important to me. It's dear to my heart. I was born and raised here. So I want to build bridges with the American people. And I'm very thankful that there are people like yourself in the United States who we are on a similar page in terms of trying to build bridges with the rest of the world to build what is called sustainable peace, and not to build economies based on wars in order to generate money for the minority of the people who are in charge of taking these decisions to go to war around the world on the expense of the people. We paid 500,000 people victims in mm-hmm. Syria, and many people do not know what happened in the country, right? That's why I like also to speak to you today about what's happening in Iran, in the region, in West Asia. I just want to go through the summary of what happened yesterday. So what we know so far about Israel's strike on Iran, U.S. officials have confirmed that Israel has carried out military operations against Iran. They used some mini drones to attack some targets in Iran, in Isfahan. The Iranian government played down the scale of the attack, and the senior commander in Iran's army saying there was no damage in Isfahan. Isfahan is home to sites associated with Iran's nuclear program, and all the sites in the area are fully safe. Now, tensions across the region remain high after Iran launched hundreds of drones as well as cruise missiles towards Israel on Saturday. And this was the first time the Islamic Republic ever directly attacking the Israeli state in response to the first April strike on an Iranian diplomatic building in the Syrian capital, Damascus, which killed a senior figure in Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. On Thursday, Iran's foreign minister told CNN that if Israel chooses to retaliate, Tehran's response would be immediate. However, a senior Iranian official told Reuters on Friday that Iran has no plan for immediate retaliation against Israel. And now yesterday, so we know what happened. A few drones were flying in And the Iranian attacks were also well calculated. Let's say, what's the nature of the Iranian retaliation and Israel's response to this retaliation say about deterrence and escalation in the region? Are we closer to a regional war, or both sides are cooling down the tensions?
Well, we're certainly in a dangerous position. And I find that we all keep repeating that phrase over and over again. This idea that what we're dealing with is dangerous. And it becomes worrisome that people are going to feel that we're crying wolf, right?
Yeah.
That we're speaking about something that doesn't ever seem to come true. This great regional war, this apocalyptic showdown, this World War III. And, even if just because it doesn't produce that weekend, or isn't produced tomorrow, doesn't mean the threat's not there, that the reality of it is diminished. I mean, we went through the Cold War, with that sort of Damocles of nuclear Armageddon over our heads. Fortunately, it didn't happen. It doesn't mean that the danger wasn't real. It also doesn't diminish the idea of the Cold War as a hot war, though, too, right? Where approximately, figures I've seen, 30 million people killed in conflict during the Cold War, directly related to the hostilities between the U.S. and the Soviet Union that we determined were cold, because essentially it wasn't white people killing each other.
Yes.
So this, what we're seeing here now, where it goes, and I hope the Iranians show restraint. They've done that in the past. They're incredibly mature compared to the Israelis in the West. They're also a lot smarter than the Israelis in the West. I don't think either side, if you put it down on paper and then do some, forecasting, kind of figuring out your second and third order effects of what happens here, as well as the understanding that this is war. And war is a superhuman force that can't be controlled. So whatever you think might happen, well, that's probably not that's going to happen. Right. You're going to war is a breeding ground of unintended consequences. And the Iranians certainly seem to have the wisdom and the maturity in their leadership to get that. And so you look at their response to Israel's attack on their consulate. As you said, it was very calculated in order to basically serve as a warning. I view it as a demonstration. Look, we've got more than 300 drones and missiles that we're willing to waste. We've got so many of these things. We're willing to throw these away. We're willing to give you 3 days notice about this attack. When we launch these drones, we're going to televise it, and you're going to have 8 hours to intercept them. Right? I mean, that is unheard of. That's what's really unprecedented, right? This demonstration as a means to give warning to Israel: do not go down this path. Our cheap to make, quick to make drones, and the ballistic missiles are more expensive and they take longer to produce, but still, compared to the Israeli air defense munitions, a lot cheaper and a lot quicker to produce. Hey, Israel, if you want to go down this pathway, we eventually will overwhelm your air defense systems with our drones and missiles. What we threw at you was our old stuff. We're just cleaning out inventory. If you want to know how this works, ask the Ukrainians. And so Israel's response, with these small drones that possibly could have been launched from inside of Iran, if not from in Iraq or Turkey or Afghanistan or someplace, because of the range of the drones, but very small, supposedly shot down by the Iranians as well. So no damage. So again, almost like a demonstration, almost like this seemed to be more of a safe face saving. But we also don't know if this was unrelated to the Israelis. This could have been from a group allied with Israel, or just a group generally that is a separatist group, whether they're Kurdish or Baluchi or whoever, that are at arms with the Iranian government. So we're not in, the Americans are saying this was the Israeli response, but if this was all the Israeli response was, are we able to breathe that sigh of relief? Or do we have to worry about there's something else coming? So I think to make kind of forecasts or predictions at this point, I'm still holding my breath to see whether or not that was really their response, whether it was actually really them. Is that going to be it? The Iranians have said, of course, hey, we view our response to we review our retaliation to your attack on our consulate in Damascus. We view that as the end of things.
Mm.
So, I mean, there's plenty of reasons I think for the Israelis to uh, hold back. Certainly, they have their political reasons, they have their ideological reasons, they have the inertia of decades of bloodlust for the Iranians
Yeah.
to urge them into a conflict with Iran. But there's also a number of things I think as well that are holding Israel back from actually jumping into something that could become this regional war. And we should say it already is a regional war, right? I'll
Yes, it
end with
is.
this, right? Because, yeah, Ken Klippenstein at the Intercept did a great job
Mm.
laying out how this involves what happened last Saturday involves 16 different countries,
Yes.
right? So it already is a regional war. And the idea that it could spread or escalate is certainly one that we all have to accept as a real risk, and as a risk that none of us should accept, actually.
Yes. Actually, regional war is already ongoing. It's the question is the scope of the regional war, and so many players are involved in this nowadays. And what happened is, in my opinion, that the Iranians have decided to end the strategic patience with vis-a-vis the United States and the Israeli axis in the region, and this was, according to them, was necessary to reestablish the deterrence
Yeah.
against Israel. And I think they managed to do so. And I've seen so many comments from talking heads ridiculing the Iranian response and saying that this was a theater and they have just told the Americans and everyone in the region, yes, because this was calculated. And despite that, what the message was, I'm able to send hundreds, if not thousands of drones, overwhelm your air defense systems
Mhm.
and the radars. And then I'm going to send my long range missiles, including the hypersonic ones, and I'm going to hit the places that I want to hit. And you will need Jordan, you will need the United States, you will need France, and you will need Great Britain to come in protection of you. So this was the message sent. And to be honest with you, this type of strikes now from the Israeli side, it's a little bit, I'm relieved a little bit, but at
Mhm.
the same
Sure.
time, I'm suspicious because Netanyahu told Biden that if not a strike against Iran, then I'm going to go to Rafah.
Right.
And this is going to be inflict more pain on the Palestinian people, right? But
Right.
if Israel insists on this tit for tat retaliation or a different sort of retaliation against Iran, don't you think this could also change the Iranian nuclear doctrine this time? That Iranians long said we don't want nuclear weapons, and this is against our religion to have nuclear weapons. But I'm being very objective with you. I also think that if there is an existential threat against Iran, they could just make a fatwa and say that we are on an existential threat and we will build our nuclear weapons.
Yeah, I certainly don't know it well enough to understand how that decision making will go within Iran, but you can certainly have the empathy for them and have the, just the type of strategic thought processes that would lead you to understand why Iran would change their policy, right? I
Yeah,
mean, they are in this idea of deterrence, which I really didn't answering the question you asked me about that, but they are. I think that's what they established with, or they're trying to establish. For
mm,
years they let things go, or they allowed to they utilized retaliation, if you will, through their allies in Lebanon or Syria or Iraq, but
yeah,
that was not direct response to it. And I think as well, the scale and the scope of the symbolism of the destruction of the consulate in Damascus by the Israelis was something that you could not just let your allies respond to with a barrage of rockets, right? I mean, like, so you also have to remember that Iran is looking at this genocide in Gaza, seeing this moral horror occur, and seeing the rest of the world unable to do anything about it. And now
yeah,
we're through we're heading towards the seventh month of it. The other aspect of it too is that Iran has been on the receiving end of many acts of war by Israel, sanctioned by the United States, of course, and probably supported by the United States. But we've seen, say, over the last dozen or so years, we've seen what, at least five or six Iranian nuclear scientists assassinated within
yes,
Iran. Right? We've had multiple cyber attacks on Iran. You've had drone attacks. There were drone attacks, probably the same type of drones that were used presumably yesterday, were used last year to attack a facility as well in Iran.
Mm.
So, I mean, at some point, you have to, as a nation, respond because you have to, you have certainly domestic political reasons why your constituency, your public needs to see a response, but you also have to attempt in some way to establish some degree of deterrence. Otherwise, it's going to continue to happen. And the Iranians, of course, we shouldn't forget to say, they waited 10 days to respond to Israel's attack in Damascus. They were looking for the international community, specifically the UN, to do something about such a clear and blatant and obscene violation of international law, particularly for diplomats, right? I mean, we talk about protected spaces, and, so for diplomats not to, it's kind of like how looking at the Western media and just being in shock at how they don't seem to be concerned, or it's lip service that they're paying to the 150 dead Palestinian journalists, right?
Yes.
I mean, so all those things. And the other aspect of deterrence then as well is, I think, the way the Iranians have addressed the Arab nations. So, letting the Arab nations know that we will respond if you are going to allow the Israelis to overfly you, if you're going to allow the Americans to shoot missiles and fly fighter aircraft from your countries, then we will consider you a part of this. Yes. And certainly that is something that the Arab nations have to really consider. It also has a real limit then on what Israel can do. If Israel has no ability to overfly, say, Saudi Arabia, how do they get their aircraft to deliver munitions to Iran? So it takes a chunk of Israel's strategic strike capability away from them if the Arab nations say no to them, right? So another way to deter future Israeli action is to kind of create a soft block, if you will, among the Arab states of those who are saying up front, we won't allow for the Israelis to use our airspace.
Yes, this is an amazing analysis, Matthew. You know what happened also when the Yemeni war erupted and the Saudis and the Emiratis expected for the Americans to protect American presence and American forces to protect them efficiently, right? Yeah. And then they realized that no, they didn't receive the proper protection from the Americans. And now, fast forward in 2024, the presence of the American forces, they were considered in the past few years that they cannot protect us, but now it turned into a threat. Like if there is a war in the region, then these countries, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and the rest, they will come under fire. Right. Unfortunately, they will come under fire because American assets will be hit in the region if the Americans actively engage in this war, right? So there is this strong argument that the presence of the American forces are now a source of a threat for these countries instead of being a security guarantor for them. It's completely flipped the situation.
That's absolutely right. I mean, because what they're looking at is, say, for the U.S. air bases, like Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, right? Our air bases that we have in Qatar and UAE, naval facilities in Oman and Bahrain. These are not insignificant. These are major bases. They would be the target of hundreds of Iranian ballistic missiles, including ones similar to the ones that were able to get through Israeli air defenses and strike the Israeli base. So this is not an idle threat. This is something that they really have to take to heart, as well as the fact as without the genocide in Gaza, how would their public be with them openly siding with not just the Americans, but with the Israelis? But now with what's occurring in Gaza, is this something that the monarchs would look at and say, you know what, this could give the tension, the tension within my country, would this open that up? And could I lose my power because of something like this? Would this be too much for my people to accept? And that would put me in jeopardy. The other thing too is the economics of this. One that I want to say one more thing. A friend of mine, another commentator, Nima, he said this about how, a couple of years ago, people were shocked at how after Russia invaded Ukraine, the world didn't line up behind the West. right? And many countries were neutral, and many countries were openly supportive of Russia. And certainly Russia, you know, in terms of their economy, had no problems finding markets. And I
Yes.
think that's the same for Iran. Iran, I think, is even a case further. Russia has probably had a plan in place to prepare themselves for what occurred in terms of the Western sanctions. They've been under Western sanctions for years, but certainly for the last, say, 10 or 15 years, they've been preparing to a degree. The Iranians have had a self-reliant economy for 40 years now, and
Yeah.
they have been underneath Western United Nations sanctions for decades. They are well prepared to withstand the costs of economic warfare that will come from a conflict with Israel, in a way that Israel cannot be, because they simply haven't had that need, right? And Israel's already in great economic distress from the last 6 months. A whole bunch of reasons for that. We can go through that if you
Yeah.
want. But, you know, this idea of certainly Iran would have would incur economic costs from this war, but it would not be anything near that the Israelis would have to endure, and also not anything near that the West would have to endure, including Joe Biden's reelection campaign. Because
Hmm.
if, you know, this was to happen, the Straits of Hormuz closed, whatever. The idea of now in the United States, we have $5 a gallon and $6 a gallon gasoline, which I know to folks overseas may not seem like a lot, but in the US, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. You know, that takes away chunks of people's pay. I mean, it has
Yes.
a real huge impact on
Yes.
people, on families. And so that would, you know, if Joe Biden has got a campaign and try and be reelected, he's already having hard enough time. Well, if Genocide Joe is also $6 a gallon gasoline Joe, he's
Yeah.
not getting reelected.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's all these other things that I think the Iranians have taken into consideration as they calculate in terms of trying to, because your point, Kevork, was really important about this idea of how do you establish deterrence. If you
Yes.
can't get, and how then, if you have deterrence, you can get some degree of de-escalation.
Yes, exactly. You know, one of the things taking from what you said that happened in the region, and the Iranians, I don't know if they were intentionally did it or not, but the rulers in the area, for example, the Jordanian one or the Saudi one or the Emirati one, the Iranians now put pressure on them because um, everyone, the vast majority of the people in the region are pro-Palestine, right?
Mhm.
And appearing is during such conflicts as if you are helping Israel or the United States, it's a very bad recipe, you know, in front of your
Exactly.
people. It's like
Yeah.
people know that there is a genocide happening in the Gaza Strip, and now the Jordanian foreign minister, the second day, he made a ridiculous statement. He said, "We're going to gun down," he said, "every hostile object coming from Iran and Israel." And this is so ridiculous because only 2 weeks earlier, before this statement, Israel actually used the airspace of Jordan,
Yeah.
and they bombed in Aleppo, and they penetrated the airspace of Syria. Like, they used the airspace of Jordan, and they didn't do anything about it. And now they say that they will. So let's see. I suspect that, but they will.
And
Um,
that shows like the precarious position that American foreign policy, that the American empire has put these rulers in, has put these governments in. If we go back a few months ago when those 3 American soldiers were killed in Jordan, and I'm
yeah,
not sure, I haven't kept up with it, but you know, the first comments out of Jordan officially was that this didn't happen in Jordan, right? I
yes,
mean, like, so trying to play to their public this idea that we don't have American troops who are conducting combat operations against Syrians and Iraqis in Jordan. It's only
yeah,
support bases. So yeah, this idea, and as well too, you see these ludicrous statements from the Jordanians about shooting down these Iranian drones for reasons of safety. And it's kind of like, well, you're shooting them down over your airspace. They could possibly then crash onto your own people's homes,
and it
right?
happened.
I mean, so it's very thin. So when you see that type of really poor argumentation, right,
Yeah,
these really obvious, desperate attempts at public relations, you get an idea of how, what the balance beam that
yes.
these countries may be walking on to placate the American empire, right, and to stay in line with it. And that means, man, we gotta go along with Israel on this.
Yeah, yeah. And it shows on whose side are they also in Gaza, because those cases
Mhm.
are both interconnected with each
Right.
other. And it makes you question what they say in public, probably they're saying something else behind closed doors with American officials. And I remember when 7 European foreign ministers all of a sudden decided to go to Egypt and trying to bribe basically Sisi with billions of dollars of loans and investments in Egypt in return that he receives 2 million Palestinians. So they are basically aiding and abetting the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians in Gaza indirectly, diplomatically. But what is going to happen is the Palestinians are going to come 2 million, if it happens, I suspect that, to Egypt, and then they will distribute them to the European countries. They are speaking about quotas. Germany, how many Palestinians are they going to receive, and this and that. This is very, you're actually helping Israel to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. And when Germany was taken by Nicaragua to the ICJ, the major arguments on German mainstream TV, it's like they host these talking heads and they're like, look at Nicaragua, they have a bad human rights record there. Who are they to take us to the court,
Yeah,
And
exactly. Who are they to criticize our support for genocide?
yeah, this is not a legal argument, and this is the case, it's political talk. Now
Yeah.
we have, as we're speaking about Palestine yesterday, in the UN.
I didn't address your point about
Please.
nuclear weapons, though, and we
Please.
really should, because it is so important, and that is this type of reality that the Iranians are facing. Okay, do we really want to get into a tit for tat with these genocidal maniacs who have nuclear weapons, right? And I don't think, after everything we've witnessed, what we've known about the Israelis for decades, as well as what we've seen in the last 6 months, the idea that Israel, if they get too far on their back foot, if this is too painful for them, the idea of them using a nuclear weapon against the Iranians is something that I don't think any of us could dismiss or say, no, that won't happen. I mean, particularly, again, after the last 6 months. So if you are Iran, or if you're Turkey, or you're Egypt, or you're the Saudis, this idea of being confronted with these situations, why is it that, say, the Turks and the Egyptians can't sail their navies and break the siege of Gaza? Well, eventually you get down to it. It's the fact that neither one of them want to risk losing Cairo or Ankara to a nuclear weapon, right?
Yes.
I mean, so this is my fear, is that this increases the risk of nuclear proliferation. And if I had to put bets down on what would happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what's going to be, what will branch out of this, that would be one of them, Kevork, is that you'll see nuclear armed states in the Middle East now, because confronted with this, they realize that lack of balance, not having that deterrent that Israel had, was something that they had to finally address. And as well, then the idea of, well, we've got nuclear proliferation and international law and international institutions. Well, what does that all mean when the people with the nuclear weapons are breaking those all the time? So why shouldn't you join that nuclear club and break those rules too?
Yes. I mean, so many countries are thinking of developing nuclears because of this. I mean, I genuinely believe if Syria had nuclear weapons, these covert operations would not have happened in the country, and they would have been immune of these attacks. Yesterday, in the UN,
you don't want to get to the point where where everyone has them, because then you're essentially like the United States, where everyone's got a gun and we're all shooting each other.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, yeah.
That's also something to consider. Yesterday in the UN, they voted for recognizing Palestine as a full member in the UN. And the United States vetoed the Security Council resolution recommending observer state of Palestine be granted full United Nations membership, in favor 12 against the United States, and abstains were 2. Of course, I'm sure those were Great Britain and France. Dmitry Polyansky, he's the first deputy permanent representative of Russia to the UN. He said this vote will go down in history, showing the true colors of the US and its double standards. And then when the Israeli ambassador tried to speak yesterday, the permanent representative of Russia in the UN, he walked out of the UN session before the start of the statement of the Israeli side. First of all, the US officially recognizes the right of the Palestinians for self-determination. This is in every document in the foreign policy programs, right? The Palestinians have the right for self-determination. But how is it possible that they have the right for self-determination without statehood? Like, this is something very tangible for them, right? They're seeking for it, and I think this is the right time to address this issue. I mean, what's holding them back from giving the Palestinians the right to have a state?
Well, I mean, I think it's when you're the empire, you're allowed to make language as you want it to be. So you see in American politics, say with Iran's attack on retaliation on Israel, you had members of Congress after members of Congress, people throughout the American media saying things that Iran's attack was unjustified, that it was unprovoked. And you want to say to these people, do you know what these words mean? I mean, so it's the same way, say with Julian Assange,
Yeah.
where the United States is saying you do not Julian Assange does not have the rights of an American citizen, right? So he does not have the constitutional right to freedom of speech, but we are going to hold him to American laws,
Of course, yeah.
right? I mean, so you're not a citizen, so you don't have the rights, but we're going to hold you to the laws we hold her. I mean, so it's that doublespeak, it's that hypocrisy. And, it's this idea that, yes, the Palestinians should have statehood, but then they get into just this gaslighting, this formulations,
Yes.
how they contort themselves, in terms of their speech and their rhetoric and their dialogue to justify is just astounding.
Yep.
But I'm glad to hear the Russian ambassador walked out. Just a kind of a personal anecdote. I addressed the UN Security Council just last month, and the American ambassador, Ambassador Wood, who is the one who vetoed, he walked out during my speech.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's the idea, though, that yes, we want to see a two-state solution. That is official American policy, and that's what members of both elected and appointed and as well as career U.S. officials will raise their hands and attest to, that this is our
Yes.
policy. But you've had since 2010 or 2012, Palestine's been in a position to be provided with statehood through the United Nations, and the United States throughout that time for the last 14 years, however long it's been, has done everything it can to stop that. And we just
Mm.
saw it again with their veto. I mean, so the Brits and the Swiss abstained. The French
Yes.
voted for statehood, as well as the Japanese, the Maltese, other good, loyal vassals of the American empire went against the Americans on this. But and it gets back to this: what is driving American policy towards Israel? And it's
Yes.
because we have a political system here that is able to be captured by special interest groups, that is able to be captured by lobbies. And so in this case, so that applies just not to Israel. In the US, we have a system of legalized bribery. So that is why the pharmaceutical industry dictates healthcare policy in the
Yes.
United States. It's why the banks on Wall Street dictate our financial and monetary policy, right? Of course, the military industrial complex. Why does the United States produce almost agriculture wise, you get into what do we produce here? We produce very little that's actually good for people, and very
Hmm.
little that actually supports small farmers, because it's the big agriculture industry that dictates our agricultural policies, because they're able
Yes.
to bribe the Congress, right? As well as then capture the regulatory agencies. So yeah, it's the same with Israel. And that is essentially the problem that we face, is that even if Joe Biden, I've said this before, he's a good Catholic. If the Virgin Mary were to visit him tonight in his sleep and tell him to undo what he has done, and he calls Netanyahu, which he could do, as many people have said, the genocide could end with one phone call. He decides to do that. Well, the American Congress would seek to impeach him the next day.
Wow.
I mean, so because the strength of the lobby dictates it. The Israeli lobby is threatening to put $100 million, and maybe it's more now, but this is what they were threatening last fall: $100 million into American congressional elections this year. That is a massive amount. I mean, that is a massive amount of money. They in 2022. DMFI, the Democratic Majority for Israel, which is connected with APAC and some of the other Israeli lobby groups, they spent about $20 million, between $20 and $30 million, I believe, intervening in approximately 13 or 14 U.S. House of Representative races in the U.S., and they were successful in all but one. Summerlee in Pennsylvania was the only one to beat them. Otherwise, the amount of money they put in, that $1 million, $2 million, however much into each race, that was enough to make sure their candidate won. And that was, any analysis of those races demonstrates clearly that it was that spending that won that race, right?
Wow.
And so they're very effective. So if you're an American politician, you are either lusting after the carrot they provide, or you're scared to death of that stick that, okay, you don't want this money. You don't want to go along with our pro-Israel line, and you want to speak on behalf of international law and morality and justice, et cetera. Go for it. But all this money we're going to give you to an opponent. And so, yeah, that's what runs this thing. So this idea of how do you break out of it? It's a structural problem here in the U.S.
Yes.
And so that's why it's similar to in the U.S. we have 90 some odd percent. I spoke about guns earlier. We have some proposed gun legislation that will be what's called common sense, because more than 90% of Americans agree with it. But because of the gun lobby in the United States, it is impossible to get that gun legislation introduced. I mean, this is just basic stuff, in terms of like doing background checks on who's buying the guns, right? Having waiting periods for weapons, things that any gun owner I know, and I know a lot, agree with. But even with that, even with more than 90% of the American public, so you don't have that on Israel in terms of that support for against Israel. But it's certainly the last 6 months we've seen that change. But we have a real structural problem here that even if you did have 90% of the American people against Israel, you would still have massive support for Israel in the American government.
There is this Twitter X account called APAC Tracker. And what they do basically, they find the pro-Israel statements made by the senators and the congressmen and congresswomen, and they just quote the tweet and post how much money that this representative has received. And to be honest with you, sometimes I get surprised that some of them only received 60,000, 70,000, or 100,000 from APAC, and they are so loyal to Israel. It's like, I thought like they're receiving millions. It's like, is it worth it for 60,000?
That's the really embarrassing thing about our corruption in the U.S. with our public officials, is it's often very cheap. It's often very cheap. It is. It's kind of embarrassing, right? That our politicians get bought for so little. But chief among those of lifetime recipients, Joe Biden by far is the biggest lifetime recipients of Israeli lobby money. So even if the Holy Mother, even if the Virgin Mary were to appear to him, I don't even think that would shake his decisions. And he also too, we tend to focus a lot on the money, on the pressure that lobbies and interest groups can bear, and that certainly is true. But it's also the case that these people are committed Zionists. They really do believe what they're saying. Joe Biden says there's no bigger Zionist in Washington, D.C. than him, and we all have to believe that. There's been a couple of reporting coming out about his decision making over these last 6 months, and it's always punctuated with the thing that he believes he's doing the right thing. He believes sending three C-17s worth of bombs every day, flying those cargo planes from the U.S. to Israel, providing all those munitions to Israel to continue to slaughter Palestinians. He believes that is the right thing to do. So we have to keep that in mind, that we're dealing with people who actually believe this stuff.
So he believes in this stuff. What about RFK? He feels like, when I watch him with this Rabbi Shmuley, I feel like Rabbi Shmuley is blackmailing him. He has a tape on him or something. Like the way, like RFK, he speaks like reason, logic about so many things. The moment it comes about Israel, it's like he flips. Like he uses different type of brain. It's like he's not him. I
think that was really, so it was about a year ago that people began to realize where RFK Jr. stood on Israel. And it became, particularly among folks on the left in the US who might be interested in RFK Jr. as a potential option for them to support. We were disappointed because, so for someone like me, he wasn't as, he didn't embrace the concept of, like, say, a Green New Deal. So of a massive transformative economic and social program to deal with climate change, right? He wasn't embracing that, but he was still so good on so many environmental things, right? And then healthcare as well. He doesn't embrace universal healthcare. He doesn't embrace what we call Medicare for all, but he's still so much better on healthcare than Trump or Biden would ever be. Okay, so yeah, all right, I'll take the 70% solution, 80%. But then we started seeing what he was saying about Israel and Palestine, and for
Yes.
many of us, that was just a
It's a
line
deal breaker.
deal break because he's not even giving like a wishy-washy, both sides are wrong, we need to end the violence. It's not even there. He is more pro-Israel than Trump or Biden is. I think we can find statements that would show that, if we can believe that, but that's the case. So it is. I don't know. I think it's where he comes from. He's part of the elites. We have to remember that. His upbringing, his understanding of, or his belief in the myth of Israel, the fact that those he goes to cocktail parties with and attends conferences with, they really do believe that Israel is essential, an essential element of not just American foreign policy, but American of what the American empire and who America is itself. And the type of things where, why do you believe that? And then they can point to his friend Max Boot or General Petraeus, who was just at the cocktail party with them, to offer an explanation as to why. So I think there was a lot of that, but then as well, I think it was some type of political calculation where they thought mistakenly this was the right thing to do in terms of getting support, was to be pro-Israel, that it wasn't worth. And I think that's the calculation the White House got wrong in the fall, was that the loss of progressive voters, right, losing a few million progressive voters, what their calculation would not be as important as losing the support of the Israeli lobby. And I think, perhaps RFK Jr. really views it this way. But I think there's also that calculation that, look, this is not a hill that we want to die on. This is not where we want our stand to be. We don't want, we're an insurgent campaign. We're an independent campaign. It's going to be so uphill. We do not need to take on this burden of Palestine, basically. So I'm trying to be as charitable as I can to RFK Jr. I'm not voting for him, tell you that, but trying to understand why he would make this decision politically, because it did cost him. Because last summer, he was polling above 15%. And I feel that since people became well aware, prior to the genocide beginning in Gaza, that people becoming well aware of RFK Jr.'s position on Palestine, that he lost a few points. And I feel like he's not been able to get those back. So he's more in the 12 to 16% range, as opposed to the above 15% where I feel he was, a year ago.
Yeah. Matthew, I don't get enough discussing with you, but I have to ask you the last question. And I was reading Cenk Uygur today. He says, how is Israel an ally? All they do is start wars and conflicts we have to pay for. They have gotten the whole Muslim world to hate us with their endless occupation of the Palestinians. They have taken about $300 billion and counting from us already and give nothing in return. Is this only about really like a lobby, or there are invested interests there? Is Israel an ally for the United States in the region? Are they giving anything in return for the Americans?
Yeah, I think, certainly they're a toxic ally, right? In a sense that this is a very dangerous ally to have. This is a strategically erroneous ally to have. There's no, in the actuality of it, yes, they are an ally. We're sending our aircraft up there to protect their airspace. We're providing them with diplomatic cover in the UN. The United States provides Israel with any Israeli debt is backed by the United States. So when the Israelis issue bonds or other forms of debt, that's all backed by the Americans. Right. So you have the world's reserve currency. That's like you or I, Kevork, as I like to say, being able to have Elon Musk or Bill Gates as the co-signer on our car loan or something like that. Right. So, but the dangers of this ally are immense. Right. This is an ally that has a gun to our head that is forcing the Americans. I don't want to say forcing the Americans. We talk about this as if we're being sucked in, when as if we didn't create the vortex that we're going to be sucked into.
Yeah.
So we have chosen this relationship with the Israelis that comes from our taking ownership of the British Empire, right? So our taking over from the British Empire, we now have Israel as an interest. And then because of our political system that really develops after World War II, in terms of how our campaigns are financed here, you have the ability, as we were talking before, for a lobby, for a special interest, for a foreign country to capture the executive, not just the executive branch, but also the legislative branch. Right. And then so what you have then is you have this self-reinforcing cycle where, of course, if that's the way the political system works, then, of course, all the think tanks in Washington, D.C. are going to advocate for an Israel first policy. Of course, academia is going to be in line with an Israel first policy. Of course, the politicians who get into office are going to be those who took the money from the Israeli lobby. It's all self-reinforcing. So, so that then creates this relationship where when the United States actually wants to do something separate from what Israel wants, it causes a crisis.
Yes.
And then the fact that the Americans are unable to ever say no to Israel because of the domestic political consequences to them means that you have, say, even things that might have been successful 30 years ago. So just give Oslo the benefit of the doubt. Just give it the benefit of the doubt. But then it was never had a shot because the Israelis, purposely undermined it, and the Americans went along with it. So when you have a system that you're always going to have American ambassadors to Israel who are the most fervent Zionists available to take that post, this is what you're going to get. The same thing, too, with the top ranks of the State Department, the people at the Department of Defense, the people at the National Security Council. So, again, it becomes self-fulfilling. And then you get to this position where you are in this ludicrous situation, right, where it is not in the interest of the United States to go to war with Iran. And I think most reasonable people, including those most politically cynical in Washington, D.C., understand that.
Yes.
But you're also in this position where you can't say no to Israel. So now you're in this position where, okay, we will not attack Iran. The United States will not be involved in the attack from Iran. But you've also committed to completely defending Israel.
Yeah.
So now you're providing Israel with the space, the ability. Israel doesn't have to worry so much about defending itself because the Americans and all their allies are going to do it. So now Israel can concentrate further on it, putting those resources that they would use for defense into attacking Iran, right? So you're actually making the conditions better for an Israeli attack on Iran because you're enabling them to do so, right? And you can just see the way all that works out, right? So whatever protest you make, your actions are allowing for the other to exist.
Yeah. Matthew, this show was live, and in terms of the viewership, your live streaming had the highest viewership, 1,000 views at the same time between Rumble and YouTube. You're very popular, and many people are thanking you for your great wisdom and your insights. Guys, it goes without saying that Matthew's X account and also his Substack are both in the description below, and I will also pin them in the comments below, so you can also follow him, his personal statements on X and also his work on Substack as well. I just want to quickly thank the Iranian Putin. This is your proof that I am paid by the Iranian Putin. Alex Glantz and King Lalibela for the generous support, guys. Thank you so much, really, for tuning into today's live streaming, and all the thanks also goes to Matthew. Thank you so much, Matthew, for being with me.
Hey, thanks, Kevork, and thank you, everyone, for watching.
Guys, I will come back to you in another live streaming on Monday. Today is the end of the week, so Saturday and Sunday is a rest day. We will see you on Monday, 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. Peace be upon you and upon your families. Salam.